Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this day. We pray that you will bless our time together this morning as we discuss some very significant events that are related to Bible prophecy. We pray that you will bless us, keep our hearts and ears focused on the things you would have us hear today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, a lot of Sundays I feel somewhat rushed to kind of put things together because there's so many things that are happening, and I guess it would help if I put up my slides, wouldn't it? So today we're going to talk in part about the Abraham Accord. I have a few things I want to talk about before that, but this is a big deal. Even Thomas Friedman at the New York Times, who's really no friend of conservatives or the president, said that this was a geopolitical earthquake. And I think I agree with it. And I also think that it could relate significantly to Bible prophecy. And I'll try to explain that a little bit, although I'm thinking that I'm probably going to do something midweek this week just because there's so much to cover. And I think there's a lot of different scripture passages that interplay here. I may touch on those briefly today. And I will tell you that I don't really have any slides on them because I was just scrambling to get everything else done. But what happened in Washington this week was very important to everything. Just as a reminder, we talk about the convergence of events as we move closer towards ultimately Jesus' return and set up his kingdom here on earth. I've been using these slides. When these lose their shelf life, I will stop using them, but I don't think they have. I mean, I think I'm up to 8 or 9 years now that I've been using these two covers from Foreign Policy. It is a very disruptive world, and I will also remind you that the prophecy updates are now posted at Remnant Truth Network, rtntv.org. There is also an app that you can download for both Android and Apple operating system phones and iPads and notebooks. I would ask you to be a little bit patient with us as we're trying to get some of the bugs worked out. But it does seem that we are getting a fair amount of traffic, but we're putting this up because we know that at some point we're pretty much convinced that we're not going to be able to use YouTube anymore. I saw a few conservative channels that were taken down by YouTube this week, and the one thing you're going to see over the next few months, many things you're going to see over the next few months. There's going to be major, especially in the United States, as we approach a very contentious election. You're going to see all kinds of things from both sides. It's going to be very disruptive. You're going to see, I think, extremely biased, even more than you normally would, biased news reporting. I think I saw some of that this week. You're going to see things that aren't even talked about that are very significant, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. Although, it may be just there was so much going on that nobody could catch up. So let's just talk about a few things, and then we'll get to the Abraham Accord and try to put that into context. Now, this is a case I've talked about a number of times. This is there's a GoFundMe thing called Save James. This is a mother and father. They had, I think she was implanted with eggs that were conceived in vitro fertilization procedure because her eggs just didn't produce. They had twins. One of the twins, they're boys, and one of the boys, James, the parents are going through a divorce. The mother's been granted custody, and pretty much now with the court ruling this week, full control over the raising of the son named James. The father claims, and I think there's some credibility to this, there's been evidence in the court down in Dallas that when the boy is with the father, he complains about mom is trying to make me a girl. She has put him in a school where they only affirm everything that he is transitioning to a girl. The father in the ruling this week has now been ordered to pay counseling for the children, which is gender transition affirming, and that's going to cost him somewhere around $5,000 per month. This has been ordered by the court, a court in the United States. They had backed off on things a few months ago, but then they sent it out for review, and it came back about as bad as it could be. This is, in my view, this is one of these transgenderism by Munchausen, that where usually mothers try to make their child sick to gain sympathy. Munchausen by proxy, I think it's called, and this is a classic example of this. And so now you can go and find the GoFundMe thing. This was from LifeSite News, that the father would like to have some say in the life of his son, who's 8 years old and going through abuse. He's being abused by his mother. There's just no way about it. She thinks it's hip and cool. She is a doctor, by the way, I believe, which ought to trouble you even more. So pray for James and his father, that the courts would, stop losing their mind on an issue like that. There were some other court rulings this week. John MacArthur and Grace Community Church were in court to, I believe the state sought an injunction against them to prevent them from meeting. The judge denied the injunction, and there will be a hearing in early September about that. So it's not over with, but at least for the time being, the church agreed to, enact some social distancing things and not overcrowd services and that type of thing. But the state wants to shut it down, and this is an incredible thing. There was a situation, I think jokingly, a few weeks ago, I mentioned that there was a court or a church, a Calvary Chapel, I think it was Vision Calvary Chapel in Nevada, that had taken a case up to the Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Roberts was one of the 5 that voted and said, no, we're not going to hear your appeal. Whatever the local court is doing to shut you down as a church is okay. And in that, there was some very strong dissents by Justice Alito, in particular, and I think Justice Kavanaugh, who said, listen, they allow casinos to meet with 500 people, but they say a church, regardless of the capacity, can't have more than 50 people. This is clear viewpoint discrimination. And I kind of jokingly said, maybe the church should go rent a few slot machines and blackjack tables and put them around the auditorium and have a worship service. Well, it's interesting. There was a church that went to a casino in Nevada and started worshiping. They made arrangements with the casino to go there. They complied with all the rules with regard to casinos. The casino has now been fined, and I hear the church is going to be fined also. Because they had as many people as they were allowed in the casino. They were just worshiping instead of gambling with the approval of the casino operator. And so there's a much, much bigger agenda here, and I don't really have time to go into it, but it should be patently obvious to everybody now that particularly in these liberals, liberals, didn't mean to insult you, left-wing totalitarian states like California and elsewhere, they are really trying to shut down churches. Now, I don't know if you heard about this storm early this week, and this was one, I hardly saw anything about it in the mainstream media. Now, I did find an article in this morning's New York Times in the first section talking about this storm that tore across about 1,000 miles of the Midwest and did a lot of damage. And it was called a derecho. Do you remember about 8 years ago here in central Ohio, we had that derecho, that 100-mile-an-hour winds for like 25 minutes? And I remember that day very well. I was in Richmond, and Pam called me and she said, you need to get home, Richmond, Indiana, 100 miles from the house. And she said, you need to get home right away because there's a really bad storm coming, and it's 100-mile-an-hour winds, and you just got to get home. So I literally drove across, and I think a lot of other people realized it too, to keep ahead of the storm, which is coming from west to east. So I'm driving across Interstate 70 at literally 95 miles an hour. And unfortunately, even my little Prius that I had at the time, I was running out of gas. So I had to stop at the Plain City exit there, and London exit there on 42, and get gas. And I just finished getting gas. I came out, it was pitch black. I grabbed something to drink. I decided to come up 42 to home to Dublin, and just as I crossed I-70, the storm hit. So I pulled behind a truck repair shop there north of I-70, and it was like a wave of wind and water and everything else coming over the top of that building for 25 minutes. And as you know, a lot of us didn't have power for 4 or 5 days around here. Well, this storm hit the Midwest. Now, our storm was in June, but the problem is that this hit, you can see the damage that it did to some storage bins. That grain is destroyed and gone. And this happened across a large chunk of Iowa, Indiana, Northwest Ohio, where they had this damage. It was a terrible storm. Some places are devastated, places are still without power. But the problem is it's August and the corn crops are relatively mature, and this was the scene all over Iowa and other places. The corn crops were just completely flattened. Now, this is going to have an effect on the food supply. I've heard that somewhere between 30 to 40% of the corn and soybean crop in the United States could have been affected by this and effectively destroyed. And this goes on top of, drought and floods in China, in their breadbasket and elsewhere. It's just, you really, regardless of your view of the end times, it just makes sense that people need to make some reasonable preparations, because the food supply is at risk. There's just no other way to describe it. They had a bad year last year, crop-wise, across a large part of the Midwest. I think, 50% of the corn crop got in Ohio. So this is a big issue. But the other thing that just kind of struck me was I did not see hardly anyone in what I would call the big mainstream media covering this. And this is a big deal. And so you just need to really pay attention and dig if you're going to try to find out what's going on. With regard to the epidemic or pandemic, this is another thing that's happening, is the colleges, universities are going to have financial trouble, because a lot of people are saying, you want to charge me $25,000 a year to sit in front of a screen with a lousy Skype connection and not have access to campus facilities and that type of thing? And so a lot of people just aren't going to pay it. They have a big scandal now in the UK about admission to colleges and upper level schools, and they put in an algorithm that favored people in private schools, and everybody's upset. One commentator said, well, maybe it's good that some of these people who didn't go to private schools aren't getting into college. Maybe it's a good thing they're not going to go to college, because their worldview could be destroyed there. So that's a very interesting comment. I wish I had videos of this. I don't know if you've ever been to Chicago, in the River North section, there's the Magnificent Mile, Michigan Avenue, north of the river. And it's where all the Neiman Marcus and all the high-end shops, Cartier and jewelry and that type of thing. And what they did was they had roving gangs and vehicles coming in last Sunday or Monday evening. They would drop off 6 or 7 people. They would run in and smash the store windows, take things out of the store. It was clearly coordinated and planned. Even the left-wing mayor of Chicago was extremely upset with what happened. We're going to arrest you. These are felonies. One of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement in Chicago. And listen, don't write to me and tell me that this is not what's behind the movement, okay? If you don't see that this is what's behind the movement, you're foolish, okay? She got on and said, hey, well, this is just reparations. You can find the video on Twitter or YouTube. I just didn't have time to grab it today. So this is what is, it's going to be chaos around the election. Just get ready for it and understand that this is going to be true. And keep your eyes and ears open. I personally, I'm driving around, I'm seeing what I would consider to be fairly unusual police activity in areas at times, like they're setting up perimeters. I know one city, one little town in the Midwest that has a very successful industry. Black Lives Matter has said, we're coming after you. This is a town of probably 20,000 people that has some industries there that are fairly well known. I won't identify it here. But they've said, we're coming after you. So I don't know what else to say is you need to be prepared for this. The prosecutor in Chicago is one of these left-wing, Soros-funded, Soros-backed prosecutors, and she said, I'm not going to prosecute petty crimes. In Seattle, the police chief, the black female police chief, has resigned because she can't take it anymore. Police are resigning and leaving and retiring or taking medical leave for post-traumatic stress disorder all over the country. So regardless of whether they defund the police, they're getting what they want. The city of Austin, Texas, great tech center, University of Texas Home voted to reduce the police budget. They voted unanimously to reduce the police budget by 1/3 this week, in the light of all the stuff that's going on. I have videos that I could play for you in Portland, Oregon, of protests, Black Lives Matter and Antifa on one side and counter-protests on the others, and one Antifa person chasing a conservative protester down the street and beating him with a baseball bat. You can find it on Twitter. And now you have like Kimberly Gardner in St. Louis. She's prosecuting the couple that wanted to defend their home, but she won't prosecute any of these protesters. And what you have is really chaos in a lot of places. And it's having an impact. There was a big article in the newspapers yesterday about people fleeing San Francisco. If you want a house in San Francisco, now's the time to buy one. But people are saying, I'm getting out of here. Google and other tech companies have said, we don't want you coming back to the office unless absolutely necessary until at least mid-2021 because of their concerns about the virus. So people are moving. They're moving out to the suburbs or other states. Crazy stuff. This is kind of a weird article. This was someone sent me this morning from the Washington Post. I don't think it's in the paper. It's on their website. Kamala Harris is more than her gender and race. She is also the future of American religion. And my reaction to it was, huh? What? Kamala Harris is the future of religion? Maybe she is. Certainly not the future of Christianity. She voted, she voted that Keep Babies Born, the Born Alive Act. She voted against it. She's left-wing. If somebody should make up a chart and track what she claims to be her ethnic status from day to day, week to week, as it seems to be changing. And this article says, well, she goes to a Baptist church in San Francisco, which Third Baptist, I don't even know what I'm pretty sure they're not evangelical. And a lot of politicians lie, and she's been lying at a pretty epic rate already. This is something, though, that's concerned, too, in light of If she's the future of American religion, look at what's going on in this country. We've had an opioid epidemic, drug overdose problem. It's back. And then this article on the right, it was a publication, a study done by the Centers for Disease Control. And essentially what they're finding is that in the month around June, in that 30-day period, 1 out of 4 people aged like 18 to 24 considered suicide. This is a culture and a society that has lost its Judeo-Christian religious moorings, and people have lost hope. And I think as we move further and further down the prophetic timeline, which I really think we are in, this is going to continue to be an issue. People are going to be in despair. And so the church needs to be ready to advance the gospel and the cause of Christ in light of that. The fields are white. We don't know how successful it will be, but certainly we know this. People are losing hope at an epic rate. Now, I could go on. I could talk about vaccines. I could talk about the coronavirus. I think most of you are probably tired of hearing about it. I am tracking it. I'll have comments when I think it's appropriate. But it is, there's a lot of disinformation. Let me stop here for just 1 second and say 2 things. We always have a Department of Corrections here at FBC. And I will apologize and ask your forgiveness for playing a video last week that had a couple bad words in it as people were shouting and yelling in response to massive explosions. Okay, I mean, but I missed it. I had a couple copies of it on my computer. I'd played it a number of years ago, and I grabbed the one that didn't have the sound turned down. So I apologize for that. I ask your forgiveness on that. And then there was one more thing that I was going to correct. Oh, I was calling hydroxychloroquine. I was calling it hydrochloroquine, I think. So go to a doctor. You know, don't go don't go buy stuff based on my advice. Okay. So I apologize for that. So it's hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and Z-Pak. Does seem to be pretty effective in treating this. And they're just shutting everybody down that puts up videos that talk about it. I mean, like Dr. Simone Gold, whether you agree with her or not, she seems a pretty rational person to me. They shut down her website. I mean, whoever had her website just shut down her website. Her emergency room group was told, if you don't fire her, we're terminating your contract to do emergency services at this hospital. And I guess I don't get it, because this is a drug that's been used all over the world for 60, 70, 80 years. Everybody knows the side effects of it. So there's a much bigger agenda that's going on here, and probably beyond what we have time to talk about here. But there are plenty of people talking about it. I guess you just have to be sure that whatever you're looking at is fact-based and not fear-based speculation. I see a lot of that going on, and it's very troubling. I continually ask people when they send me some things about the vaccine or whatever, I said, okay, where's the technical description of that? And what they send me is another video of somebody who doesn't cite any sources. It's just, in my view, it's a form of gossip. And I'm willing to be persuaded, but let's stick to the facts. So now we're going to talk about the facts of a geopolitical earthquake in the Middle East. At least that's the terminology that Thomas Friedman at the New York Times used the other day in his column. Boy, where do we start? It was funny, Thursday morning I just decided to sit down and take a break. the translation is Pam made me sit down and take a break. And she made me a sandwich, and I started to eat the sandwich, and then all of a sudden, they pop in. I think we had Fox News on. They pop in with President Trump announcing this historic deal between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, a historic agreement in the Middle East. And so I sat there and watched it for 20 or 25 minutes, and I thought, okay, I have enough for Sunday, right? So all over the world, now the National, which is a publication in the United Arab Emirates, it's interesting how people focused on things. So, Israel was, we have this agreement, we have this economic agreement and peace agreement and arrangement with the United Arab Emirates, which is historic. But then when you go to the United Arab Emirates, they focus on other things. So their focus in their headlines was, Israel freezes Palestine annexation for UAE ties. And that's how they spun it. Now, they froze it, they suspended it, they did not terminate, Netanyahu did not terminate his desire to annex certain parts of the Jordan Valley in what's known as the West Bank, more properly known as Judea and Samaria. That's still on the table, but it's been taken off the table. It's not on the table right now. It's been suspended until at least after the American elections. And the thinking, I think, is that if Biden wins, then Netanyahu may go ahead and act, because what does he have to lose then? There's also a lot of turmoil in Israeli politics that they need a budget deal. They're trying to get things through to get Netanyahu out of office. Sometimes with the people that are in his governing coalition are pushing that. It's a mess. There's fears that there might be, I guess it would be the fourth election in a couple of years if the government falls apart. Netanyahu is supposed to serve as prime minister for 2 years. He has at least a year and a half or more to finish that out. Then Danny Gantz is supposed to have 2 years. But I personally think, judging the way Israeli politics are going, the chance that Netanyahu is going to make it through the whole full 2 years without another election is pretty slim at this point. There are very large protests that are taking place in Tel Aviv and elsewhere in Israel that they want to get rid of Netanyahu. And some protesters are saying they want to kill him. I mean, they're saying that. So, everything that we see going on in our country is sort of ramped up and going on in Israel as well. And these are just small microcosms. I don't even have a slide on this, by the way. I'll just swerve off on this. There's concerns that China's going to make some big moves. They've been making a lot of big moves recently. They have that $400 billion deal for 25 years with Iran, and that provides for joint security arrangements as part of their building the Silk Road. They also entered into a $100 billion deal this week with Saudi Arabia. I saw a video recruiting Chinese soldiers, and it said we have to be ready to fight and die for the cause of China. That was sort of like the recruiting video that you would see for the armed services here, although it was on a different level than I would have expected. There's also a lot of internal tensions between Xi and I think the premier of China as to the direction that they're supposed to go. You don't see a lot about that, but somebody did send me a video about that from somebody who's a China analyst yesterday. So you have all that going on. I don't even have any information on this here. I'm just telling you there's a long, long list of things that aren't going to get covered in depth today, but because I think this is really important, especially when it comes to Bible prophecy. So this is what the National said: Israel freezes annexation. Gulf News did the same thing. What Netanyahu had proposed doing was to take these certain areas, some areas around Hebron, and areas in the West Bank where settlements are located, You can see the dark blue is where Israeli settlements are, and annex those into Israel. Jericho would remain part of the Palestinian sphere of influence, but this Jordan Valley along here would all be annexed because of security reasons. And we've showed you the videos before of how Israel has to control the Jordan Valley to be secure. So that's going to be suspended for a time. I don't know that it's really going to change that much on the ground, but the reaction has been very mixed. Even this Arab news from Saudi Arabia said that UAE and Israel are charting a new path. The Palestinians were in dismay. They were upset. I'll show you a little bit more about that. Here is President Trump's announcement Thursday morning about the agreement.
Well, thank you very much. This is very important. This is a big event, and I want to just congratulate all of the people standing behind me because they have done an incredible job. This is something that hasn't been done in more than 25 years. Just a few moments ago, I hosted a very special call with two friends, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates, where they agreed to finalize a historical peace agreement. Everybody said this would be impossible. And as you know, Mohammed is one of the great leaders of the Middle East. After 49 years, Israel and the United Arab Emirates will fully normalize their diplomatic relations. They will exchange embassies and ambassadors and begin cooperation across the board and on a broad range of areas, including tourism, education, healthcare, trade, and security. This is a truly historic moment. Not since the Israel-Jordan peace treaty was signed more than 25 years ago has so much progress been made towards peace in the Middle East. By uniting two of America's closest and most capable partners in the region, something which said could not be done, this deal is a significant step towards building a more peaceful, secure, and prosperous Middle East. Now that the ice has been broken, I expect more Arab and Muslim countries will follow the United Arab Emirates lead, and I want to just thank them for being. It's not surprising, knowing Mohammed so well, it's not surprising they are in that lead position, and normalize relations with Israel. We are already discussing this with other nations, very powerful, very good nations, and people that want to see peace in the Middle East. So you will probably see others of these, but this is the first one in more than 25 years. This deal will allow much greater access to Muslims from throughout the world to visit the many historic sites in Israel, which the Muslims want to see very badly and have wanted to see for many, many decades, and to peacefully pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is a very special place for them. My first trip as president was to Saudi Arabia in May of 2017, and my speech to the assembled leaders of 54 Muslim countries. Every single one was by their leader, their number one leader. It was an amazing, really an incredible event, very important event. I made clear that the problems of the Middle East can only be solved when people of all faiths come together to fight Islamic extremism and pursue economic opportunity for people of all faiths. And when you look at what's happening, you're seeing a lot of progress is being made that nobody thought could possibly be made. And things are happening that I can't talk about, but they're extremely positive. I want to thank the leaders of Israel and the UAE for their courage and for their leadership to forge this tremendous agreement. It will be known as the Abraham.
It was known as the Abraham Accord. Now, let me play the announcement. Of course, because of the virus, this was all done remotely by teleconference. here is what Benjamin Netanyahu, this is the English version of his statement, that he had to say also on Thursday.
Well, today we usher in a new era of peace between Israel and the Arab world. I just came from an historic virtual conference between myself, President Donald Trump, and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates. We announced the establishment of a full and formal peace between Israel and the UAE. It includes the mutual opening of embassies, direct flights, and many, many other bilateral agreements. This is the greatest advancements toward peace between Israel and the Arab world in the last 26 years, and it marks the third formal peace between Israel and an Arab nation. In 1979, Prime Minister Menachem Begin made peace with Egypt. In 1994, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin signed a peace treaty with Jordan, and today I'm honored to announce a formal peace agreement with the United States, with the United Arab Emirates. I believe there's a good chance we will soon see more Arab countries joining this expanding circle of peace. I want to thank President Trump for his critical help in brokering this historic accord. And I want to thank him for his revolutionary vision for peace, which is the most realistic and important formula for peace in the region. President Trump's Middle East plan served as a basis for today's historic peace announcement. Israel and the UAE are two of the most advanced countries in the world. Together, we'll transform the region and forge an even better future for our people. This is a future of peace, a future of security, and a future of prosperity. I've always believed that we could establish peace with the Arab world, and I've been working towards that lofty goal for decades. You may not know it, but I've been doing it all the time, in meetings that are publicized and in many that are not. In Washington, in the Middle East, in daylight, and in nighttime. In recent years, Israel, under my leadership, has made advancement with ties with such countries as Sudan, Oman, Bahrain, and other nations in the Gulf. I have reason to be very optimistic that today's announcement with the UAE will be followed by more Arab nations joining our region's circle of peace. And to the people of Abu Dhabi and its leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, I say, Salam alaikum, Shalom aleichem, peace unto thee, peace unto all of us. Thank you.
Well, that's interesting. And did you notice that one of the things that he focused on there was the economic aspect and the prosperity things that this would bring Israel's way? I think that is significant. I think that's something we need to sort of remember and mull over, particularly in view of where we are. So here is President Trump's desk, and that's sort of an upside. I could not find a right side up view of this thing. There is on the whitehouse.gov website, also Arab News, all the newspapers and publish this. The one thing that I noticed, though, as you know, I sort of take the headlines from newspapers, and like Haaretz there, they had a picture of Netanyahu announcing his views on the peace agreement. And so I'll take that and I'll embed in that the video, just for sort of something visually interesting. I looked and looked and looked in American media, especially the major newspapers. I could not find a single front page picture of President Trump announcing this. Now, maybe I'm crazy, but I looked at a lot of them, dozens, and I could not find a single one. Now, I'm sure they're out there someplace, but they weren't any of the ones that I looked at, none of the big major names that you would think. So here's the joint statement. You can go to the whitehouse.gov website and you can read about it. Let me just read a couple of those delegations, some of the provisions. Delegations from Israel and the UAE will meet in the coming weeks to sign bilateral agreements regarding investment, tourism, direct flights, security, telecommunications, technology, energy, healthcare, culture, the environment, the establishment of reciprocal embassies, and other areas of mutual benefit. Opening direct ties between two of the Middle East's most dynamic societies and advanced economies will transform the region by spurring economic growth, enhancing technological innovation, and forging closer people-to-people relations. As a result of the diplomatic breakthrough and at the request of President Trump, with the support of the United Arab Emirates, Israel will suspend declaring sovereignty over areas outlined in the president's vision for peace and focus its efforts now on expanding ties with other countries in the Arab and Muslim world. The United States, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates are confident that additional diplomatic breakthroughs with other nations are possible and will work together to achieve this goal. So, and then they're going to cooperate on developing a vaccine for the thing. So what I took from that is that this Trump's peace to prosperity plan, and note, I think it's important that you note when they're talking about these things, they talk about a couple of things. We'll see some towards the end of my presentation talk here today. But one of the major things that they focus on is the economic aspect of what this agreement is going to be able to achieve. This is very significant from a prophetic standpoint, because we know that in the end times there is this mystery of Babylon that's identified. And there's a lot of different views of where it is, and I'm not here to give you all the different views. Everybody's views on Mystery Babylon are like noses and ears. Everybody has at least 1 to 3 of them in the Bible prophecy community. So again, I'm not here to settle that, but notice though that one of the aspects of Babylon in the end times in Revelation 17 is the economic aspect. And I find it very significant when they're talking about these peace arrangements. Prosperity seems to be at the forefront. So I think that that is very significant. So the reaction was mixed. By the way, I'll talk a little bit about Turkey in a moment. This is Libya with which way is Libya going to go? Because Libya is sort of involved in all of these things in the Middle East, and that itself is prophetically significant. But back to the reaction to the Abraham Accord. This is from Foreign Policy. I'll just say this. If the elephant in the room, and remember they said other people are going to join, and one of those is Saudi Arabia. So there's articles out there now, analysts are saying, Saudi Arabia, they're coming in. They're going to be next. They're going to have to do something. They can't continue on the path that they're on. If the elephant in the room, Saudi Arabia, joins the diplomatic party, this article in Foreign Policy says, this is when praise for the deal should be doubled and even tripled. Saudi Arabia, not the UAE, is the biggest prize for Israel in terms of diplomatic recognition. And it is Saudi Arabia, not the UAE, that traditionally speaks for the Muslim world and whose king is the custodian of the 2 holy mosques. The Arab domino effect will happen the moment the Saudis get on board. If or when they do, the code of broader Arab-Israeli security cooperation will finally be cracked. And so where are they now? Well, King Solomon has been, there were prayers being offered up for him a week and a half ago because he was needed prayers for recovery from medical tests. Now, I don't know what medical tests you need to recover from, but he's now this week recuperating at a resort in Neom. That's the big city that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman wants to build and is building. It's underway, and it's very interesting. This is in the region where Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, and even Israel kind of come together. And it's also a very significant region biblically because this is where, in the area where Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and where I think the correct location of Mount Sinai is. And you can go watch the Mahoney's Patterns of Evidence videos that are out there. They're very well done. I think they're very solid. And so the fact that this is sort of, this area is being rejuvenated here at this time is, again, something that I consider to be very significant. So there's a lot of things going on with foreign policy. It is also worth recalling the article says that the Saudis are in a totally different position from the Emiratis when it comes to Israel. The deal involved minimal risk for the Emiratis domestically, not so for the Saudis. If the regime embraces Israel prematurely, without there being a peace agreement between Israelis and the Palestinians that settles the issue of Jerusalem, the Saudi people might revolt, or at least the country's clerics would, and that is something that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, simply cannot afford. So, and what is Mohammed bin Salman? What is one of his main focuses been? There are reports that there's some reformation being made to, like, women can drive now in Saudi Arabia and some other things. But Mecca and Medina have not been opened up to outsiders, to non-Muslims. That's still in place. But a big focus of him, he has his Vision 2030 plan, and he's had conferences similar to Davos-type conferences in Saudi Arabia. His vision is economic prosperity. And again, you need to focus on that issue because we know that when this Mystery Babylon is constituted in the end times, the economic aspect is going to be a very big part of that. And you're going to see this from all over different parts of the world about getting on board with the economic prosperity thing. Here's some reactions. This was left as Tel Aviv, a building with the United Arab Emirates flag. Now, the United Arab Emirates is essentially a conglomeration of 7 kingdoms, sheikdoms in the United Arab Emirates that get together and they elect a leader, a president from the kings, the sheiks that are in charge. And they focused on economic development. This is the Khalifa Burj Dubai in Dubai, the tallest building in the world. It's 2,800 feet tall. Okay, that's, if you remember the Sears, I don't even know what they call that thing now in Chicago, the Sears Tower. That's what it will always be to me. You know, that's like with the needle, with the antenna on top, it was like 1,400 feet tall. So this is twice the height. And look at what they did this week. They lit it up with lasers. They do this with flags of different countries. There was some things with Pakistan, so they lit up like the Pakistan flag. This is an Arab country, one of the major economic centers of the Arab world, lighting up their tallest building, the tallest building in the world, with the Israeli flag. I think this is a big deal. I don't know how else to say it. The reaction from the Palestinians was predictable. They have rejected it, and there on the Temple Mount, you can see them with that's the, I think the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates, right there by the Dome of the Rock, between the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, stepping on the flag. And this is what they do. I saw a video of a lady who was very upset with Nasrallah in Lebanon, and she was throwing her shoes at the screen, and I think cursing in Arabic. Thankfully, I didn't play that video, not understanding Arabic. I got in enough trouble for what I did last week. But remember when President Bush was in Iraq and a journalist threw his shoe at President Bush? That is like the ultimate insult to Arabs. So that's why they put the Israeli flag, the American flag, down on the thing and trample on it, because that's to insult it. You might not be surprised that Iran also had a reaction to it. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard and President Rouhani issued warnings to the United Arab Emirates, you should not do this, this is not good. And part of the reason for the United Arab Emirates did this is because they're concerned about Iran. And so the prospect of being attacked by Iran and what Iran might do to them, they found more troubling than entering into an agreement, a peace agreement with Israel. That was the calculus that they made. And so a lot of this is to be against Iran. Also, by the way, the UN Security Council had a virtual meeting Friday or yesterday and said that arms bans that have been approved by the UN with regard to selling arms to Iran are now terminated. That's only going to ramp things up in the region even more because people are going to start openly, I'm sure they've been doing it covertly, they're going to start openly selling arms to Iran. This is what Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen said. This step is a blown up, this is a translation, for the Arab Peace Initiative and the resolutions of the Arab and Islamic Summits, international legitimacy and aggression against the Palestinian people. I call for an immediate emergency meeting of the League of Arab States and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to reject this declaration. The Palestinian leadership rejects what the UAE has done as treason to Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa, and the Palestinian issue, and in recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and demands it to immediately retreat from this shameful declaration. So, as usual, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. This is a Seth Frantzman who's one of the editors at the Jerusalem Post. He wrote this in National Review, a milestone in relations between Israel and the Arab world. Normalized relations mark a new strategic consensus in the region, Seth writes. The new accord under which United Arab Emirates and Israel are normalizing relations marks a major shift in Israel's dealing with the Gulf states and the region in general. Brought about with support from the Trump administration, the deal will certainly help cement the legacies of Trump, Netanyahu, and UAE's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. Each country stands to gain something different from the deal. Washington can point to excessive peacemaking, achieving what the Obama administration did not, and which no administration had done for over a quarter of a century. Abu Dhabi can say it halted Israel's threat to annex parts of the West Bank, and Jerusalem can point to it as a new milestone, this as a new milestone in its relation with the Arab world. Now, Seth is a very good geopolitical analyst. He also says this: the deal comes in the context of major tectonic shifts in the Middle East. In May, Greece, Egypt, France, Cyprus, and the UAE slammed Turkey over its increasingly aggressive stance in the Mediterranean. Last month, Israel signed an East Med pipeline deal with Greece and Cyprus. Egypt, a key ally of the UAE, recently signed a different Mediterranean agreement with Greece, delimiting maritime jurisdictions. Now, he goes on, he also talks about the fact that there are some risks here. Turkey, a leading opponent of Israel today, despite diplomatic relations dating back to the 1950s, Turkey slammed the UAE deal and threatened to break off relations with the Gulf state hours before Israel's deal with the UAE was announced. Hours before Israel's deal with the UAE was announced, Netanyahu said Israel was siding with Greece in its recent tensions with Turkey over things in the Mediterranean. More about that in just a moment. Seth also mentioned about the fact that Iran supports the Houthis, as does Turkey, the Houthis in Yemen. And I did look up this is the Houthi slogan. You know, everybody's got a slogan, right? This is what they say. Allah is greater, death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam. Is there any question where they're coming from? Was that not clear to anyone? So look, this is a big deal agreement. I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about one other aspect that I think is a big deal. And it better be in quick moments because I see the time is going by very quickly today. So now let's look at Lebanon for a little bit. And I took the wrong video. I took the wrong thing here. This is Chicago. I mistakenly thought when I just looked at it quickly that was Lebanon. because parts of Chicago look like Lebanon today, and Lebanon is a huge mess. So this is sort of some of the editorial cartoons I found around the Middle East newspapers. If you see this one, this is from Al-Quds, which is published in the UK. It's an Arabic Saudi Arabia language, where we stayed in the UK when we were there a year and a half ago. It was a heavily Arabic place. We had 50 channels in our hotel, and 10 of them were Arabic in London, in the heart of London. I mean, I'm talking like just down the street from Hyde Park and Speaker's Corner. So this will show you what's going on. I mean, there's a Islamization of Europe underway, and this cannot be ignored, either geopolitically or prophetically. This is very important. This is, you see, Iran is buying off Hezbollah. This is from 2006, when the second Lebanon war was underway. This is from a blog post someone sent me this week about sort of how Hezbollah does. You know, Hezbollah, well, they could do one of those, like the Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons with Hezbollah sometimes. Jonathan Spire, another great analyst of the Middle East, talks about Hezbollah's deep state prepares to investigate. And you can find this. It was published at the Jerusalem Post on Friday. It's also up at jonathanspire.com at his website. The long and short of what Jonathan has to say is this. Hezbollah controls everything in Iran. Everybody knows Hezbollah controls everything in Iran. And so essentially, when people are saying that the Iranian or the Lebanese government is going to investigate things, ultimately it comes back to the fact that Hezbollah is going to investigate itself. And what do you think the result of that is going to be? Caroline Glick also has a similar article at Newsweek. I also want to alert you to something. Newsweek has a new editor that is conservative, and there are so Caroline Glick is being published at Newsweek. Does that tell you anything? Wow. Okay. This is a media earthquake. So pray that this guy lasts. Can't remember his name, but there are a number of people who've made this notation. So she says this: if Lebanon were a normal country, the statement that Marine General Frank McKenzie, he made this statement about the chief of the Lebanese Armed Forces. U.S. willingness to continue to work with the Lebanese Armed Forces to help provide aid and assistance to meet the needs of the Lebanese people during this terrible tragedy. That's what one of our representatives said. Carolyn says, if Lebanon were a normal country, McKenzie's statement would make sense. But it isn't, and as the circumstances surrounding the destruction last Tuesday of the port in Beirut and much of the surrounding 10 miles of the city demonstrate, Lebanon is not really a country at all. Its national institutions and leaders are not actually national institutions and leaders. The best way to describe them is as front companies and front men for Hezbollah. I think she's exactly right. So if you want to look that up and read her article, she also has some good articles up at Israel Hayom about this. This is a big deal. Nasrallah, he gave a speech Friday in Lebanon. He seems to have a tech team to get him up. I think we do a little better quality videos than he does, but he's prolific. It's like wall-to-wall Nasrallah a lot of the times, it seems like. I think the only person that speaks more than him is Erdogan in Turkey. Hezbollah chief, this is from the Times of Israel. Hezbollah chief Nasrallah warned Israel on Friday that his organization intended to carry out a game-changing revenge attack for the death of one of its fighters in an airstrike last month that was widely attributed to Israel. He also called the new UAE-Israel normalization deal a betrayal of Arabism and said the UAE had given a personal electoral favor to U.S. President Donald Trump, which is interesting because he talked about it when most of the mainstream media in the United States would not even give anyone credit. There are other people that are making, Turkey, of course, they came out, they slammed the deal. This was from I-24 News this morning. Morocco may be the next country to sign on. And then this headline from the front page of this morning's Jerusalem Post: Israel working to formalize Bahrain ties and implement the UAE agreement. And you might remember that the Bahrain was where they had one of these peace prosperity conferences headed up by Jared Kushner. They hosted that last year as part of this peace process. Turkey continues to raise a lot of things. They're making all these moves in the Mediterranean. And I will apologize if I feel like I'm jumping around. I am, because it's all interconnected. It's all very important. I was working on my browser slowed down a little bit on my computer one day this week as I was looking through these things, and I suddenly realized that I had 47 tabs open. And it's not uncommon for me to have, I'll close down apps on my iPhone, I'll have 35 apps open or something like that, because things change. Now, there is a news channel in Israel, Channel 7. It is run by Christians, as far as I can determine, and I think they're doing very good things. They have a bi-weekly program that they put up called Jerusalem Studio that deals with issues in the Middle East. So the other day, they had recorded, they're usually about a half-hour program. They bring in 3 or 4 different analysts, and Jonathan Hessen, I think is his name, who is a Christian. I've heard him, declare that he's a Christian. So they have a very interesting, they're located in Jerusalem. So here's just a clip of their little program that they were talking, Jerusalem Studio program they talked about the other day about Lebanon.
And also joining me here in the studio is our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, to what degree are we really in a cross point, if you will, and where are the things currently situated as the aftermath of the Beirut blast is still slowly showing the true face of what happened and what may happen in the near future?
Well, when one looks at the horrendous pictures and at the protests and all that transpired over the last 10 days, it is unthinkable that things will go on as they did up to now. However, this is Lebanon, and everyone is seasoned enough to know that disappointments are in order. Now, Lebanon happens to be the smallest country in the Asian continent, half the size of pre-1967 Israel, some 5.5 million citizens, plus hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of refugees, be they Palestinian or Syrian. And the problem is that in the 100 years, exactly this week, since the Sevres conference, where the Ottoman Empire had to give up its acquisitions, including Syria, which included Lebanon until 1943, and there is still no border demarcated between them, Lebanon has not gained the true attributes of a nation state. And the most important one is that it does not have monopoly on power. Of course, there were all the militias, which ostensibly 31 years ago in the Taif agreement were supposed to give up their arms except for Hezbollah. But the dynasties, the political dynasties, if you look at the list of party heads, you find the same old names, even if they are younger people. You find the Frangias and the Jamails and the Shamuns and the Hariris and the Al-Selans and the Jumblats. Clans, armed clans, because there have been terrible massacres and no one is going to give up their arms. And foreign powers, be they Syria, France, Israel, and so on and so forth. So to say that it is unthinkable that things will not change now, one has to be doubtful because this is Lebanon.
Well, Lebanon is a mess. President Aoun, the other thing that happened this week was the Lebanese government resigned. So who has the structures in place, social, service, and otherwise, when the government resigns? Well, Hezbollah. So this is a huge problem. President Aoun, Lebanese politics are sort of like, I think they're much more complicated than one of those Rube Goldberg devices, where everything interacts with each other. They have a very strong president. Part of that comes from the Treaty of Sevres that he mentioned that had its 100th anniversary this week on August the 10th. All of this is very complicated, and what's going to happen, nobody knows. Aoun also said this week that they were investigating whether outside actors were involved. Nasrallah said that Israel was involved and they were going to take revenge on their involvement in the explosion in the port. My personal conclusion is that it's clearly something happened with Hezbollah's management of rocket fuel and rockets and missiles that were stored there, and they shot themselves, shot Lebanon in the foot, in the head, and the body with this. It was a big mess. Now, earlier this week, in connection with the Treaty of Sevres, there were some articles that were written. This is from the Washington Post. A century-old treaty haunts the Mediterranean. Now, I could spend based on what I've been reading this week alone, another hour or two. I'm not going to do that. As I said, I'm going to have to do something midweek because there's just too much going on. But this Treaty of Sevres, back in 2016, the New York Times even tweeted that Erdogan was suffering from Sevres syndrome. This was a very humiliating defeat for the Turks. They had one of the longest running, probably the longest running in history, empire in the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire. It fell apart in World War I. By 1920, it was being broken up, and they entered into these different arrangements. Now, a month ago, July 21st, Erdogan gave a speech at an event in Ankara. I'm going to play just a little clip from that. I think I have it. No, I'm not seeing it. But, well, give me 1 second, because I do think I want you to see this. He gave a speech, and he covered, even for Erdogan, this was a long one. That's saying something. He is tremendously, I don't know if I would say gifted, but his ability to speak a lot. And it can be torturous to listen to him and to try to translate it. But here is his talk. They have it broken down. You can find it he has his own YouTube channel. Fortunately, he's only getting about 1,300 to 3,000 views on this nonsense. It's interesting that the beginning of this, you see the pencil drawing in the background. This is the presidential palace in Ankara. He gave this speech in Ankara, and it was a 2-year review of what they've done since his government was elected 2 years ago, his current government, when he became president, and president for a long time, sort of like Putin. But you see the pencil drawing there. That's the 900-room palace in Ankara that he's had built for himself. 900 rooms. It's a big thing. It probably costs, between $500 million and $1 billion to build. So he gave a speech, and one of the topics of his speech was he focused on international things that we're doing. He did a little bit about education, but then he focused on different aspects of Turkey's drone technology, science and technology that we're doing, robotics. They've had a very extensive development of drones. They're really a world power when it comes to drone technology, computers, that type of thing. So Erdogan's been involved in these massive building projects, giant mosques, dams all over Turkey that control the water that flows downstream to Syria and Iraq. All of this is a big deal. Istanbul Airport is now, I believe, the largest airport in the world. It just opened last year. So all of these things are revived. He's trying to revive the Ottoman Caliphate and take control of the Arab world. And from a Bible prophecy standpoint, look, there are different views as to where Turkey fits in the whole prophetic scenario. I think it's very significant. I'm not saying Erdogan is the Antichrist. He is an Antichrist, given what he's been doing to Christians in Turkey, taking over this large church and turning it back into a mosque. And so this is another one of these things that I consider to be watch Turkey. It's a big deal as to what's going on. He's developing his navy. He's going in. So the Washington Post article referenced an article in the French publication Le Monde. So I got on, I downloaded this thing, I've been translating it, and essentially they made note of the speech that he gave on July 21st, and this is the title of the article, the translated title, Revenge on the Treaty of Sèvres. And so this is what's done. This treaty was enacted in 1920. They met in the powers that won World War I met in a factory outside of a porcelain factory outside of France, Paris, France, and entered into this agreement to up the Islamic world. So they ended up, these are some of the updated versions of the maps that were in the Le Monde article. Turkey on the offensive, the upper one, and it shows how Turkey is trying to go back from what they had after the treaty, which was the sort of the, what color is that? I'm not real good with colors sometimes. I mean, you like my blue shirt, right? So whatever that sort of chartreuse. Okay, chartreuse. I need to get a chartreuse shirt, I think, Pam. So chartreuse, I do not have one, by the way. That's what they had after the treaty, and you can see how they've been slowly expanding it out lately. And I talked about an article in Foreign Policy a few years ago where he wants to get that border down. Remember, he took over a small strip. He wants to get that border. He wants to take over Mosul and Aleppo. He thinks that belongs to the Ottoman Empire. But that's only, he's got designs on Jerusalem, folks. He's also doing these things. So, and again, prophetically, very important. This is what it said in French. And now, the other thing was sort of where Turkey sits in the world. The dark gray areas are petroleum deposits, gas deposits. You can see that Turkey in the blue doesn't really have anything that it controls that are significant. You see the economic zone that they did between Libya and Turkey. It's this fake thing. Now everybody's making these treaties and they're all crisscrossing each other and overlaid over everybody. And so now it's become, used to be relatively calm, now it's like a geopolitical bowl of spaghetti. So here's, I want to play this because this is the other aspect of the deal that I think hasn't been talked about by a lot of people. This is Dubai. This is the United Arab Emirates. Dubai and Abu Dhabi are their main cities. And I want you to listen to a little bit about what Jared Kushner talks about. The president alluded to it in the comments that he made. Here's Jared Kushner doing a press conference on Friday at the White House. Just listen to a couple minutes of this.
Things to come. This is an icebreaker between these two countries. This is the first Arab country to normalize relations with Israel in a long time, 26 years since Jordan. And what we're going to hopefully see from there is more countries start to do the same. The final thing I'll just say is that here in America, the biggest threat that we saw in the last campaign was really two things. One was ISIS. The caliphate was growing. We were seeing journalists being beheaded. We were seeing people burnt in cages. And the threat of ISIS was something that was very scary to a lot of Americans and needed to be stopped. The instability was providing a place for extremists to plan attacks, to plan all kinds of terrible things, and the extremists were trying to radicalize the next generation. One of the biggest excuses that extremists use to radicalize the next generation is the mosque and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and saying that it's being threatened and the fact that Muslims aren't able to pray there. This deal will allow for flights from Dubai and Abu Dhabi to Tel Aviv, which will allow Muslims a real entree to come and visit Israel peacefully and to come and pray at the mosque with whatever frequency they deem appropriate. This is a big breakthrough. As people go there and pray and see that this is available, they'll share it with their friends and they'll share the experiences. They'll share pictures of it on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And people throughout the world will see that the mosque is safe and that all people are welcome there. So this is a really great step forward for the region, a great step forward for the country, and a great step forward for the world. And again, I just want to really compliment the three leaders who worked very hard to make this possible. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of Abu Dhabi, and President Trump here in America. Thank you.
Well, that's interesting. Did you hear what he said about the religious aspect of this? Now, well, I'm not going to look it up. Revelation 11 talks about in the end times that John is told to go measure the temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount that will be rebuilt. But it says what? Don't measure the outer court because that is what? Given over to the Gentiles. Now, I personally think this is a very significant development, that the leader and the son-in-law of the most powerful nation on the planet right now, at least we think and hope so, is talking about the religious aspect of a peace agreement between Israel and an Arab country. And that this is being used as an entree to get other Arab countries on board. This is, again, I have used, I don't know, has anybody been counting how many times I said it's a big deal today? It's a big deal. And you might remember, this goes back to January or February of 2019. Pope Francis went to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And he met there with the imam who is the head of the Al-Azhar University, the largest Muslim educational institution seminary in the Middle East, located in Cairo, Egypt. You might remember it is the university where Barack Obama on June 4th, 2009 made his first foreign speech. That was, hate to use the term again, a really big deal. If you want to understand the beginnings of the Arab Spring and the meltdown in the Arab world, go watch, I know it's painful, go watch Barack Obama's speech. It was, and I know I covered it, I know a couple other pastors talked about it the next Sunday. It was very, very important. And so here is the Pope meeting with this imam. They signed a historic document. Here's some video clips of what happened when he went to Abu Dhabi. This was January or February of 2019. He went to the big mosque in Abu Dhabi. That was with the leader of Abu Dhabi. I think the Crown Prince you'll see, you can see him in the background of some of these pictures. They then sat down and had a signing ceremony there where they signed this historic document about agreement between Christians and Muslims. Now, again, pretty important thing that happened. And now we see the first Arab country that breaks the logjam on peace with Israel is the country where this event occurred a year and a half ago. I think they're connected. And you have the president and the son-in-law of the president talking about the religious aspect of this deal and bringing Muslims to worship in Jerusalem in the context of everything else that's going on in the world. Now, a few months later, in September of 2019, the National published pictures of this set of buildings that's to be constructed where? In the United Arab Emirates. It is called the Abrahamic Family House Project and will show we are all brothers in the country which this week entered into a document that has now been called and named by everybody involved, what? The Abraham Accord. Because Abraham is common to Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And so this building, this series of buildings, this interfaith place is going to be built in Abu Dhabi by the United Arab Emirates for the worship of all faiths. Now, I need to terminate this. I think all of these things are very important. So I'm going to do an update. If I get it done midweek, I get it done. Don't send me emails. Don't send me messages. I do have some other things I'm working on. But let me just give you maybe a few minutes of just sort of some broad parameters of what I'm thinking. I firmly believe in the prophecy of Daniel, where he said in Daniel chapter 12 and somewhat in Daniel chapter 11, Daniel, seal up the book until the end of time. Many will run to and fro. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's traveling. That'll happen a lot in the end times, and people going back and forth all over the world. My question is that happening right now? Is travel back to normal? Is it anywhere close back to normal? So maybe the understanding, we've sort of had a little bit of a shallow understanding of the to and fro of Daniel chapter 12. Now, I personally have believed for a long time that the deeper meaning of it is they will go to and fro, back and forth through the book. And then it says, a number of verses in Daniel 11 and 12, the wise will understand and instruct the many. Now, my view of that is that when we get further down the road in the end times, we're going to have a clearer understanding of how all of this is going to play out. And I've said, I have my opinions. Everybody has their opinions. I respect people that have different opinions from me. But I think we need to be careful about being too dogmatic about how exactly all this is going to play out. Because we're going to be thrown some curveballs or knuckleballs that will come from directions that we didn't really think. Now, listen, I've been around the prophecy community virtually all my life. I've never heard anybody talk about a building for all faiths in Abu Dhabi. I've never heard a president talk about Muslims, making it easier for Muslims to come to Jerusalem to worship. I'm just telling you, I think we've gotten a lot of clarification this week about some things. So one is, don't be too dogmatic. Second, Daniel 9:27 talks about he, the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with the many. Now, in the prophecy community, it has entered the lexicon that covenant is a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians or something. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure. I always would like to go back and who was the first person who said it was a peace agreement? And it may have been, in the context of September 1993, when they had the big thing on the lawn of the White House in front of 3,000 witnesses, which is kind of an interesting number. They entered into this agreement the Palestinians and Israel, and that led to some of the division in the land and that type of thing, that people say, oh, look, that could be the peace agreement. But we have multiple peace agreements. We have the Arab Peace Initiative that was talked about this week by one of the articles. We have the Party of Four. We have proposals from the U.S. We have the Jordan. We have the Egypt. We have this. I'm just going to make a couple comments. I'm not dogmatic about this. I think it may be time that we need to start rethinking this meme that's developed, that it's a peace agreement. Because it says the covenant. It may not be a peace agreement. I'll go out on a limb and say that. And immediately people are going to be sawing off the limb behind me. Well, good luck. Because what is interesting about this, so who has peace with Israel right now? Who has an agreement? Jordan, Egypt, now United Arab Emirates, maybe Bahrain, maybe Saudi Arabia, maybe some others, Oman, maybe Qatar. I doubt that, but I think Oman will be on board pretty quickly. And what is at the heart of all of those agreements when you really get down to it? It's essentially a recognition that Israel has some right to the land. Is there a biblical covenant that gives the descendants of Abraham, Israel, the Jews, a right to the land? Okay. Are these agreements in some way consistent with that covenant? At least, not totally, but they're at least recognizing it. Do these agreements also have economic aspects to them? Yes. So I'm just going to throw this out there for further discussion. If you look at the table of nations and a couple of what I think are still end-time prophecies, Ezekiel 38 and 39, and Psalm 83, there's kind of a connection there. Psalm 83, by the way, mentions 10 nations. I'm just throwing that out there. 10 nations. Ezekiel 38 and 39 mentions other nations that come and attack Israel at some point. What's interesting is that none of the countries that Israel has entered into these agreements with thus far are mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So I'm just saying is I think one way that some of this stuff is starting to flesh out in my mind may be that the recognition of the right to the land becomes an aspect of what the Antichrist comes to attack. Because they hate Israel. These countries mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So I'm just saying I'm certainly not dogmatic about this. It's just something that, as I'm sort of analyzing this week, there are none of the countries, the UAE, potential countries or countries actually entered into this agreement are mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39, except for Sheba and Dedan, which may include the United Arab Emirates, by the way, the Arabian Peninsula, sort of are standing apart at this attack that comes against Israel in the latter days and saying, hey, what are you guys doing? What are you doing? Because it's against what they may have agreed to with Israel and recognizing Israel's right to exist. And setting up, you do recognize the right to exist when you exchange ambassadors and that type of thing. And this is going on right now as we see. So I find it very interesting. I'm still working it out in my own mind. I think it's very provocative, but I think the religious and economic aspect of this agreement, and I'm not saying this is not I don't think this is the agreement of Daniel 9:27. And in some respects, there's some good things about it. Israel gets to be at peace with yet another country. That's good. But also know that there's a really sort of good news, bad news part to Bible prophecy. I mean, we want peace, right? But there'll be a false peace. They'll have devastating consequences. So I think that I'm all for peace, but I also know what's going to happen. And it's a very troublesome time. So just some things that I'm thinking about. I'll try to flesh them out a little bit more with some maps. And I appreciate some people communicated with me about this week that sort of opened my eyes. I just think there are many, many things going on, many different levels, and we cannot dismiss them as insignificant or inconsequential. We live in epic times. And the epic thing this week was the Abraham Accord. Let's pray. Father, we pray that you will fill us with your Holy Spirit. Give us wisdom and understanding in these times, and help us to always act with grace, but grace that is informed by the Word of God and the truth of the Word of God and the reality of the gospel of Jesus Christ and what your Word says is coming on this world prophetically. Give us strength to stand in these times and to share our faith. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.